The forgotten children. The stars hung like frozen tears across the void, silent witnesses to empires risen and fallen. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Imperium had ruled unchallenged, a civilization so vast that entire star clusters served as mere districts in their administrative grid. Their fleets numbered in the millions, their technology approached the theoretical limits of physics, and their confidence bordered on divine certainty. They had forgotten about humanity. It was an easy thing to forget. Earth had been a curiosity once, a primitive world catalogued during the Second Expansion era. The xenoanthropologist had noted the species with clinical detachment, bipedal, carbon-based, technologically adolescent, prone to internal conflict. The Imperium had marked the system as under observation and moved on to more promising prospects. That had been 3 millennia ago, when human civilization still carved messages in stone and gazed at the night sky with more wonder than understanding. The galaxy had changed much since then. The Imperium had absorbed 17 major civilizations peacefully or otherwise. The Krell hegemony had risen and been crushed. The singing nebulas had been colonized. Dyson spheres glittered around a dozen stars, and quantum gates linked the spiral arms like neural pathways in an impossibly vast brain. Earth had been forgotten until the day the sensor nets at Border Station Sigma 9 registered something impossible, Admiral. Reva Morgan stood on the bridge of the UNS Resolute, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the alien station grow larger in the view screen. She was 47 years old, though the time dilation of faster-than-light travel made that number almost meaningless. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, streaked with gray she'd never bothered to remove. Her uniform was dark blue, almost black, with no decoration save for a single silver pin over her heart. A stylized representation of Earth, a world most of her crew had never seen. Distance to the station? She asked quietly. 2 million kilometers and closing, replied Lieutenant Chen from the navigation console. His voice was steady, but Morgan could hear the undercurrent of tension. They all felt it. This moment had been building for 3,000 years. Weapon status? All systems green, Commander Torres reported from Tactical. Capacitors at full charge. Defensive screens active. Countermeasure suite standing by. Morgan nodded slowly. The Resolute was not the largest ship humanity had ever built, but it was the most advanced. Every system, every weapon, every line of code represented the accumulated knowledge of 3 millennia of development. Evolution, compressed into metal and energy, forged in the fires of necessity and survival. The aliens didn't know. They couldn't know. The Imperium's last scout ship had visited Earth's solar system 800 years ago, conducted a perfunctory scan, noted no significant changes, and departed. They had no idea what humanity had become in the darkness between the stars. Admiral, the communications officer called out. We're being hailed. It's an automated challenge. Standard Imperium protocol for unidentified vessels. Put it through. Audio only. A synthetic voice filled the bridge, speaking in Galactic Standard, the lingua franca of the Imperium. The ship's AI translated it into English in real time, though Morgan understood both languages fluently. Unidentified vessel, you have entered Imperium-controlled space. Transmit your identification codes and prepare for inspection. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. This is your only warning. Morgan allowed herself a small smile. After 3,000 years, humanity's first words to the galaxy should be carefully chosen. Open a channel, she commanded. All frequencies. I want every ship, every station, every listening post within 50 light years to hear this. Channel open. Admiral. Morgan stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the view screen where Border Station Sigma 9 hung like a small moon, bristling with weapons ports and sensor arrays. She thought of Earth, that distant blue marble where her ancestors had looked up at these same stars and dreamed. She thought of the long night, the centuries of isolation and struggle. She thought of every human who had lived and died in the darkness, building toward this moment. This is Admiral Reva Morgan of the United Nations ship Resolute, representing the Terran collective. We come not as supplicants, but as equals. Humanity has returned to the galactic stage, and we will not be ignored again. There was a pause. Morgan could imagine the confusion in the station's command center, the frantic searches through ancient databases for any reference to Terran or humanity. The synthetic voice returned, but this time there was a note of uncertainty beneath its programmed confidence. Terran Collective is not recognized in Imperium records. Your vessel's design is unknown. State your point of origin and technological classification. Our point of origin, Morgan said softly, is a small planet you catalogued and dismissed 3,000 years ago. As for our technological classification, she glanced at Torres, who nodded. Perhaps a demonstration would be more efficient than explanation. Admiral? Torres asked, awaiting confirmation. Fire a warning shot. Something they'll remember. Target that weapons platform on the station's northern axis. Disable it, don't destroy it. Let's show them what 3,000 years of human ingenuity looks like. Admiral. The Resolute's main weapon was called a Cascade Lance, and it represented a fundamental leap beyond anything the Imperium had developed. Instead of simply delivering energy to a target, it created a temporary rupture in the quantum foam of space-time itself, allowing the ship to project force not through space, but through the underlying fabric of reality. The weapon fired. To the naked eye, it was almost beautiful, a beam of light so pure it seemed to sing as it crossed the void. It struck the weapons platform with surgical precision. There was no explosion, no fireball. The platform simply stopped. Every system went dark simultaneously. Its power cores drained in a microsecond. Its circuits fused. Its AI reduced to silence. The station's shields hadn't even flickered. The lance had passed through them as if they weren't there. Station's tactical systems are coming online, Jen reported. They're charging weapons. Multiple hostile locks acquiring us. Hold position, Morgan ordered. Do not return fire. Let them look. Let them scan. Let them realize. On the view screen, she could see the station's gun ports glowing with building energy. Dozens of particle beams and missile tubes trained on the Resolute. A lesser captain might have flinched, might have ordered evasive maneuvers or raised shields to maximum. Morgan stood perfectly still. She had gambled everything on this moment, on the certainty that the Imperium's first instinct would be to gather data before destroying the unknown. Admiral, Torres said urgently, they're 5 seconds from firing. 4, 3. The synthetic voice returned, but this time it was different. This time there was a living being behind it, someone with authority. Someone who had seen the sensor data and realized what it meant. Terran vessel, stand down. Imperium Central Command is being notified of your presence. Do not make any aggressive moves. A diplomatic delegation is being assembled. Morgan allowed herself a breath. The first step had been taken. Humanity had knocked on the galaxy's door, and the galaxy had answered, not with welcome, not with hostility, but with something more valuable. Uncertainty. Maintain position, she ordered. Open all sensor arrays. I want detailed scans of their technology, their infrastructure, everything. We have 3,000 years of catching up to do, and we're going to do it in the next few hours. As her crew worked, Morgan returned to her command chair and allowed herself a moment of reflection. 3,000 years ago, the Imperium had looked at Earth and seen primitives. They had seen stone tools and tribal conflicts and crude attempts at spaceflight. They hadn't seen the potential. They hadn't understood that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or physical prowess. It was adaptability. It was the ability to take any challenge, any limitation, any disaster, and transform it into an opportunity. The long night had been humanity's crucible, and the Resolute was the proof of what emerged from fire. There is a saying among the old civilizations, Morgan thought, as she watched the alien station scramble to respond to their presence. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. The Imperium didn't kill us. They simply left us alone in the dark. That was their first mistake. The architects of chaos. The diplomatic delegation arrived within 6 hours, which told Morgan everything she needed to know about how seriously the Imperium was taking humanity's return. 6 hours meant they had pulled ships from active patrol, rerouted supply lines, and scrambled analysts from across 3 sectors. 6 hours meant someone very high up in the Imperium command structure was paying attention. The delegation's flagship was a vessel called the Eternal Wisdom, a name that Morgan found almost painfully pretentious. It was massive, nearly 3 times the size of the Resolute, and covered in the geometric patterns that seemed to be the Imperium's aesthetic signature. It bristled with sensor arrays and communication arrays, but was surprisingly light on visible weapons. A show of peaceful intent, Morgan supposed. Though her tactical officer had identified at least 40 concealed weapon systems, within the first minute of scanning. "They're requesting permission to dock a shuttle," Shen reported. "Denied," Morgan said immediately. "We meet in neutral space. If they want to talk, we do it in the observation lounge of Border Station Sigma 9. Equal numbers on both sides, no weapons, no recording devices beyond what the station already has." There was a pause as her response was transmitted, and then translated. Morgan could imagine the surprise on the other end. The Imperium was accustomed to dictating terms, not negotiating them. "The delegation agrees to your terms," came the eventual response. "A shuttle will depart for the station in 15 minutes. They request that you send representatives of equal authority." Morgan stood. "Commander Torres, you have the bridge. Lieutenant Chen, you're with me. And send for Dr. Okonkwo. We'll need a xenolinguist who understands the subtext." The observation lounge of Border Station Sigma 9 was designed to impress, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding space. The Resolute hung in the distance like a dark silver dagger, while the Eternal Wisdom dominated the opposite view like a floating palace. Morgan entered first, flanked by Chen and Dr. Okonkwo, a brilliant woman in her 60s whose expertise in alien cultures had been honed over decades of studying every scrap of data humanity had managed to gather about the galaxy beyond. The Imperium delegation was already seated. There were 3 of them, each representing a different species within the multiracial empire. The first was a Tall, the species that had founded the Imperium millennia ago. He stood nearly 7 feet tall with blue-gray skin and 4 arms, each ending in hands with too many fingers. His eyes were entirely golden without visible pupils, and he wore robes of deep purple embroidered with silver threads that formed mathematical equations Morgan recognized as expressions of quantum mechanics. The second was a Kess, a species that resembled nothing so much as a floating jellyfish made of crystal. She, Morgan assumed the pronoun from the delegation brief, though Kess' gender was more complex than human language could easily express, hovered above her seat, tendrils of light occasionally pulsing through her translucent body. The third was a Hrothgar, a species that looked like they'd been designed by someone who thought wolves should stand upright and study philosophy. He was covered in dark fur with sharp amber eyes that tracked Morgan's every movement with predatory precision. "Admiral Morgan," the Tall said, speaking perfect English. His voice was like music, each word precisely modulated. "I am Coordinator Thelenvex of the Imperium Diplomatic Corps. This is Senior Analyst Shimura of the Strategic Assessment Division and War Scholar Garen of the Imperial Defense Academy." "A diplomat, an analyst, and a soldier," Morgan observed, taking her seat. "You're covering all the bases. We are uncertain," Thelenvex admitted, and Morgan respected the honesty. "Your emergence has raised many questions. The records show that your species was classified as pre-spaceflight 3,000 years ago. Yet you arrive in a vessel that demonstrates technology we cannot fully explain. We are here to understand." "What specifically would you like to understand?" Dr. Okonkwo asked, her voice warm but her eyes sharp. The Kess Shimura pulsed with light. Her voice came from a translator device that floated near her central mass. "Your propulsion system, your weapons, your power generation, your computational architecture. Every scan we have conducted suggests you have made leaps that should have required tens of thousands of years of development." "It is impossible." "Impossible," Morgan smiled. "No, just improbable, but humanity has always specialized in the improbable." "Explain," Garen growled. His voice was rough, direct. Morgan appreciated that too. No dancing around the point. Morgan leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "The Imperium made assumptions about us based on a single observation 3,000 years ago. You saw our technology level and extrapolated a linear development curve. But here's what you didn't understand about humans. We don't develop linearly. We develop chaotically. Chaos is inefficient," Thelenvex said. "The path to advancement is through systematic research, coordinated effort, controlled experimentation." "That's one path," Morgan agreed. "It's the path the Imperium took and it brought you far. But it's not our path. When you left Earth, you saw a divided species fighting over resources and ideology. What you didn't see was that those conflicts were forcing us to innovate constantly. Every war, every competition, every crisis pushed us to find new solutions. Not just technological solutions, social, philosophical, strategic solutions." Dr. Okonkwo picked up the thread. "Your species, and I mean no disrespect by this, developed in relative isolation on worlds rich in resources. You had time to build consensus, to plan carefully, to optimize every step. Humanity developed on a single world with limited resources and dozens of competing civilizations. We had to be creative or die. You're describing barbarism, Shimura said, though her tone was more curious than judgmental. We're describing adaptation, Morgan corrected. When you left Earth alone for 3,000 years, we didn't have the luxury of following someone else's technological roadmap. We had to forge our own path, and yes, it was messy. It was dangerous. We had setbacks that would have destroyed lesser species, but we learned from every failure. Give me an example, Garen demanded. Something specific. Something we can verify. Morgan nodded to Chen, who activated a holographic display floating above the table. It showed a complex schematic that made Thalen Vex's golden eyes widen. This is the quantum cascade matrix that powers our weapon systems, Chen explained. It's based on principles your physicists discovered 500 years ago, but deemed too unstable to weaponize. You were right, it is unstable. Impossibly so. The failure rate in early testing was 97%. Any rational development program would have abandoned the approach. But you didn't, Shimura said, her light pulsing rapidly. A sign of agitation, Morgan had learned. No, Chen confirmed. We didn't. Because a human engineer named Sarah Kim had an insight during a training exercise. She realized that the instability wasn't a bug, it was a feature. If we could control the cascade's collapse, we could direct the energy release with precision impossible through conventional means. It took her team 40 years to crack the mathematics. 300 scientists died in testing accidents, but in the end it worked. That's insane, Garen said flatly. That's humanity, Morgan replied with a slight smile. We don't give up on ideas just because they're difficult. We pursue them because they're difficult. Every system on the Resolute has a similar story. A rejected concept, a discarded theory. An impossible approach that we made possible through sheer stubbornness and ingenuity. Thalen Vex was silent for a long moment, his four hands forming complex gestures that Morgan recognized as a tall thinking pattern. You're describing a development philosophy based on acceptable risk and iterative failure. It's antithetical to Imperium methodology. Yes, Dr. Okonkwo agreed. Because the Imperium is built on perfection. Your species takes pride in getting things right the first time, in planning so thoroughly that failure becomes impossible. It's admirable. It's also limiting. Limiting? There was an edge to Thalen Vex's musical voice now. Morgan leaned forward. Coordinator, may I be blunt? Please. Your civilization has achieved remarkable things, but you've plateaued. You're still using variations of technology you developed thousands of years ago. You've optimized it, refined it, made it incredibly efficient, but you haven't fundamentally innovated in centuries. You know why? Because innovation requires failure, and your culture has forgotten how to fail productively. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Morgan watched Garen's fur bristle, saw Shimura's light patterns become agitated, observed Thalen Vex's hand still in mid-gesture. You presume much about a civilization you know nothing about, Garen said, his voice low and dangerous. I know what your sensor data tells me, Morgan replied calmly. I know that your fleet compositions haven't changed significantly in 800 years. I know that your capital ship designs are iterations of a template established in the Fourth Era. I know that your strategic doctrine assumes warfare between near-peer opponents with comparable technology. You've built an empire on stability and predictability. And you see this as weakness, Thalen Vex said. I see it as vulnerability, Morgan corrected, because humanity is neither stable nor predictable. We're chaotic, creative, and utterly unpredictable. We see a problem and attack it from 12 different angles simultaneously. 9 of those angles fail, but the other 3 succeed in ways no one anticipated. That's our strength. That's what 3,000 years in isolation gave us. Time to fail, learn, and evolve without anyone telling us we were doing it wrong. Shimura pulsed with light. You speak of your species as if you are fundamentally different from all others. Are you truly so exceptional? Dr. Okonkwo answered this time. Not exceptional, diverse. Humanity never unified into a single culture or philosophy. Even now, the Terran Collective is a federation of hundreds of distinct societies, each with its own approach to science, art, warfare, governance. What one culture dismisses as impossible, Another pursues with passion. What one society considers heresy, another considers inspiration. We're not exceptional. We're multifaceted. Fractured, Garen said. Divided. How can such a species achieve anything? By harnessing disagreement, Morgan said. By understanding that conflict isn't always destructive, sometimes it's generative. The best ideas emerge from the collision of different perspectives. The Resolute wasn't designed by a committee seeking consensus. It was designed by 50 competing teams, each trying to outdo the others. The final ship incorporates the best ideas from all of them. That sounds incredibly inefficient, Thalen Vex observed. It is, Morgan agreed cheerfully. It's also incredibly effective. Efficiency is getting the expected result with minimal resources. Effectiveness is getting the right result, regardless of cost. The Imperium chose efficiency. We chose effectiveness. There was another long silence. Morgan could see them processing, analyzing, trying to fit this strange species into their existing frameworks and finding that it didn't quite fit anywhere. Finally, Garen spoke. What do you want, Admiral? You didn't reveal yourselves simply to have this philosophical discussion. You want something from the Imperium. What we want, Morgan said carefully, is recognition. We want the galaxy to understand that humanity is a spacefaring civilization with all the rights and privileges that entails. We want to establish diplomatic and trade relations, and we want to ensure that no one makes the mistake of dismissing us again. You're threatening us, Shimura said. No, Morgan replied. We're clarifying our position. The Imperium rules through technological superiority and military dominance. We're demonstrating that you no longer have a monopoly on either. We're not your subjects, not your inferiors, and not your enemies, unless you choose to make us so. Thalen Vex's golden eyes seemed to pierce through Morgan. And if we do not grant this recognition? If we decide that humanity is too dangerous, too chaotic, too unpredictable to allow free rein in galactic affairs? Morgan met his gaze steadily. Then you'll learn exactly how dangerous we can be. We spent 3,000 years preparing for this moment, Coordinator. We knew we couldn't match the Imperium ship for ship, soldier for soldier, so we didn't try. We focused on making every single asset we have count for 10 of yours. The Resolute is not our only ship. It's simply the only one we've revealed. It was a bluff, mostly. Humanity had other ships, but nothing close to matching the Imperium's numbers. But Morgan knew that uncertainty was a weapon as powerful as any lance. You're playing a dangerous game, Garen said. We've been playing dangerous games for our entire history, Morgan replied. We're very good at it. The meeting ended without resolution, which was exactly what Morgan had expected. The Imperium needed time to analyze, to debate, to build models and run simulations. They needed to understand not just what humanity had become, but what it might become in the future. As Morgan returned to the Resolute, Dr. Okonkwo walked beside her. Do you think they'll accept us? The xenolinguist asked quietly. Eventually, Morgan said, because the alternative is a conflict they're not sure they can win. And certainty is everything to them. We've introduced doubt into their perfect system. That's our real weapon. And if they decide the risk is too great, if they try to eliminate us before we become too strong, Morgan smiled grimly, then they'll discover why humans became the apex predators on a planet full of predators. We don't just fight to win, we fight to survive. And when survival is at stake, there's nothing humans won't do. No sacrifice we won't make, no tactic we won't employ. She paused at the airlock, looking back at the observation lounge where the Imperium delegation was undoubtedly still analyzing every word, every gesture, every implication. 3,000 years ago, they dismissed us as primitives. Now they're terrified we might be something worse, equals. The price of evolution. 3 weeks after the first contact, Admiral Morgan received an invitation to the Imperium core, the administrative heart of the galaxy's dominant civilization, built within a massive space station that orbited a perfectly engineered triple-star system. It was both an honor and a test, and Morgan understood both dimensions perfectly. They want to see us up close, Commander Torres observed as they reviewed the invitation. Study us in their territory, surrounded by their ships and their security. Of course they do, Morgan agreed. But it works both ways. We'll learn as much about them as they learn about us. Prepare a delegation. Small, just 20 people, scientists, diplomats, and a security detail. And make sure the Resolute is ready to jump to FTL at 5 seconds' notice. You think they'll try something? No, Morgan said thoughtfully. But they might. and humanity survived 3,000 years by always having an exit strategy. The Imperium core was magnificent in a way that almost justified the civilization's arrogance. The central station was the size of a small moon, with habitation rings that could house billions. Ships of every conceivable design orbited in perfectly coordinated patterns, and quantum gates pulsed with energy as vessels arrived from across the galaxy. Morgan's shuttle approached through a designated corridor, flanked by escort ships that maintained a respectful but watchful distance. She studied everything through the viewports, the architectural styles, the traffic patterns, the subtle ways power and status were displayed through positioning and decoration. "It's beautiful," Dr. Okonkwo murmured. "It's a cage," Morgan replied softly. "A very beautiful cage. Everything here is ordered, optimized, controlled. There's no chaos, no randomness, no room for the unexpected." The shuttle docked in a bay that could have accommodated a ship 10 times its size, another subtle reminder of the Imperium's scale and power. They were met by an honor guard of soldiers from a dozen different species, all wearing identical uniforms that managed to accommodate wildly different body plans. Coordinator Thalenvex was there to greet them personally, along with an elderly tall female whose robes were even more elaborate than his. "Admiral Morgan," Thalenvex said with what might have been genuine warmth, "welcome to the Imperium Corps. May I present High Coordinator Celesnim, Chair of the Imperium Council." Celesnim studied Morgan with eyes that had seen centuries of galactic history. "You have caused quite a stir, Admiral. The Council has spoken of little else since your arrival." "I hope we haven't been too disruptive," Morgan said politely. "On the contrary," Celesnim replied. "Disruption is precisely what we needed, though we didn't know it. Please follow me. The Council is eager to meet you." They were led through corridors that were simultaneously alien and familiar, the basic geometry of efficient design, translated through an aesthetic, sense humanity didn't share but could appreciate. Everywhere Morgan looked, she saw the evidence of a civilization at its peak: perfect climate control, seamless integration of technology and environment, citizens of countless species moving together in harmonious purpose. And yet, there was something missing. It took Morgan several minutes to identify it. "There's no art," she said suddenly. Celesnim paused, glancing back. "I beg your pardon?" "Art," Morgan repeated. "Music, sculpture, graffiti, street performers, anything that isn't functional. Everything here serves a purpose. Where's the beauty for beauty's sake?" The High Coordinator's expression was difficult to read. "We appreciate efficiency. Form following function is its own aesthetic." "That's not an aesthetic," Dr. Okonkwo said gently. "That's an engineering philosophy." They were saved from further discussion by their arrival at the council chamber, a vast amphitheater where representatives from across the Imperium gathered to make decisions that affected trillions of lives. The human delegation was escorted to the center of the chamber, standing in a circle of light while thousands of beings watched from tiered seating that rose up into shadows. It was meant to be intimidating, and it succeeded. Celesnim took her position at the highest tier. Her voice, amplified by technology Morgan couldn't identify, filled the chamber. "We gather to address a matter of unprecedented significance. A species we believed primitive has returned to the galactic stage, demonstrating capabilities that challenge our understanding. The question before this council is simple: how do we respond?" Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Morgan stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that projected calm confidence. A Hrothgar representative stood, his amber eyes fixed on Morgan. "I propose we respond with caution bordering on hostility. This species has hidden from us for 3 millennia, building weapons in secret. They emerge not with greetings but with demonstrations of force. They speak of partnership but act like conquerors preparing the battlefield." "We defended ourselves," Morgan interjected, her voice clear without being raised. "We disabled a single weapons platform to prove our capability. Had we intended conquest, Coordinator, this chamber would not exist." Another representative stood, a species Morgan didn't recognize, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. "You claim to seek partnership, but partnership requires trust. How can we trust a species that values chaos over order, conflict over harmony?" "Because chaos and conflict are part of nature," Morgan replied. "The universe isn't orderly, it's violent, random, beautiful, and terrible by turns. You've built a civilization that tries to impose order on chaos, and you've succeeded brilliantly. But in doing so, you've forgotten how to adapt to true unpredictability. You speak of unpredictability as if it were virtue, Celestim observed. It's not virtue, it's reality. High Coordinator, may I share something with you? Something we learned during the long night? Celestim gestured assent. Morgan signaled Dr. Okonkwo, who activated a holographic display. It showed Earth, beautiful, fragile, alone in the darkness. When you left us 3,000 years ago, Morgan began, humanity was fragmented. We had dozens of nations, hundreds of cultures, thousands of religions. We fought constantly. To you, it must have looked like dysfunction. The hologram shifted, showing scenes from human history, wars, disasters, achievements, celebrations. But here's what you didn't see. Every conflict forced us to innovate. Every disaster taught us resilience. Every difference between cultures created friction, yes, but also creativity. When we finally reached the stars on our own, it wasn't because a single unified government directed the effort. It was because thousands of independent groups were pursuing the same goal through different methods. The hologram showed ships, early, crude vessels that looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts. Some of those ships failed catastrophically. Some succeeded beyond expectation. We learned from both. And slowly, over centuries, we developed the technology you've seen on the Resolute. But more importantly, we developed a philosophy. Embrace the chaos. Chaos destroys, someone called from the darkness. Chaos creates, Morgan countered. Chaos is stars being born from collapsing gas clouds. Chaos is life evolving through random mutation. Chaos is the universe generating complexity from simplicity. Your civilization fights against entropy, trying to create perfect order. Ours rides entropy like a wave, using its energy to drive us forward. Celestim leaned forward. And you believe this makes you superior to us? No, Morgan said simply. I believe it makes us complementary. You've built something remarkable, High Coordinator. A civilization spanning the galaxy with peace and prosperity for trillions. But you've also stagnated. When was the last time the Imperium was truly surprised? When was the last time someone showed you something you couldn't explain or predict? She let that question hang in the air. Humanity can surprise you. We can show you approaches you never considered, solutions you never imagined, but only if you're willing to accept that your way isn't the only way, that perfection and order, while admirable, aren't the only paths to progress. A long silence followed. Morgan could feel the weight of thousands of eyes, the calculations of thousands of minds. Finally, Thalenvex stood. Admiral Morgan, you speak compellingly, but words are wind without substance. If humanity truly wishes partnership with the Imperium, prove it. Show us something that benefits both our civilizations. Demonstrate that your chaos can create rather than destroy. Morgan smiled. She had been waiting for this. Dr. Okonkwo, show them the archive. The hologram shifted again, this time displaying something that made the entire chamber fall silent. It was a database, vast beyond comprehension, containing terabytes of information. This is the complete archive of human knowledge, Dr. Okonkwo explained. 3,000 years of art, science, philosophy, history, music, literature, mathematics, everything humanity has created, discovered, or imagined, freely available to anyone who wishes to access it. You're giving this to us? Celestim sounded genuinely shocked. We're sharing it, Morgan corrected. Not as tribute, not as payment, but as a gesture of genuine partnership. You have technologies we could spend centuries trying to recreate. We have perspectives and ideas you might never encounter otherwise. Imagine what we could build together. Your systematic approach combined with our creative chaos. She paused, then delivered her final point. But understand this. We're not offering this because we're weak or desperate. We're offering it because we believe that knowledge should be shared, that ideas should spread, that progress comes from unexpected combinations of different perspectives. The Imperium succeeded by incorporating many species into a harmonious whole. We're simply asking you to incorporate one more, one that will never fully fit your patterns but might help you remember how to break them when necessary. The chamber erupted in discussion. Morgan could see representatives arguing, debating, calculating. Some looked excited, others fearful, many simply confused. She had given them exactly what they needed. Uncertainty wrapped in opportunity. Celestim raised a hand, and silence fell instantly. The council will deliberate, she announced. Admiral Morgan, you and your delegation are guests of the Imperium until we reach a decision. Use this time to explore the core, to meet our people, to understand what you're asking to join. Thank you. High Coordinator, Morgan replied. As they were escorted from the chamber, Commander Torres leaned close to Morgan and whispered, "That was risky. Giving them our entire knowledge base. Not as risky as keeping it hidden," Morgan murmured back. "They would have tried to steal it eventually. This way we control the narrative. We're not conquered primitives sharing their secrets, we're equals offering a gift. And if they reject us anyway?" Morgan glanced back at the council chamber, where thousands of beings were arguing about humanity's fate. "Then we've lost nothing and learned everything we need to know about whether the Imperium is worth joining." The decision came 3 days later. Morgan was summoned back to the council chamber, this time with full formal ceremony. The galleries were packed and the air hummed with anticipation. Celestnim stood at her podium, looking every year of her considerable age. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of history. "The Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's petition for recognition as a sovereign civilization. It has been the most contentious debate in recent memory. Your species challenges many of our foundational assumptions about how civilizations should develop and govern themselves." Morgan felt her heart beating faster but kept her expression neutral. "However," Celestnim continued, "after careful consideration, reviewing your archive and analyzing your technology, we have concluded that humanity represents not a threat to be eliminated, but an opportunity to be embraced. The Imperium recognizes the Terran Collective as a sovereign civilization, with all attendant rights and privileges." The chamber erupted in a mixture of applause and shouting. Morgan allowed herself a small smile. "There are conditions," Celestnim said, and the chamber quieted. "First, human vessels will submit to Imperium safety inspections, not to restrict your technology, but to ensure your ships don't pose navigational hazards. Second, you will establish an embassy here at the core and accept an Imperium embassy within your territory. Third, you will participate in the Galactic Council as full members, which means accepting the responsibilities of membership along with the privileges." "Understood," Morgan said. "We accept these conditions. And one final matter," Celestnim added with what might have been a smile. "The Imperium formally apologizes for dismissing humanity 3,000 years ago. It was premature." The chamber laughed, a sound like wind through diverse instruments. As the formal ceremony concluded and Morgan prepared to return to the Resolute, Coordinator Thalenvex approached her one last time. "I underestimated your species," he said quietly. "I thought the chaos you described was dysfunction. I didn't understand it was your strength." "Most civilizations don't," Morgan replied. "They see our arguments and conflicts and mistakes and assume we're failing. They don't realize we're learning. What will humanity do now that you have access to the galaxy?" Morgan looked out at the vast station, at the ships moving in perfect formation, at the ordered beauty of the Imperium core. "We'll explore. We'll trade. We'll make mistakes and fix them. We'll surprise you, probably more often than you'd like, and maybe, if we're very lucky, we'll help you remember something important." "What's that?" "That the universe isn't meant to be perfected. It's meant to be experienced. And the only way to truly experience it is to be willing to fail, to fall, and to get back up and try again." Thalenvex was quiet for a moment. Then he extended one of his 4 hands in the human gesture Morgan had taught him during their negotiations. "Welcome to the galaxy, Admiral. I suspect it will never be quite the same." Morgan shook his hand firmly. "That's what we're counting on." Later, aboard the Resolute, Morgan stood on the bridge, watching the Imperium core recede into the distance as her ship prepared to jump to FTL. Her crew was celebrating, quietly, professionally, but with genuine joy. "Course laid in for Earth," Lieutenant Chen reported. "We should arrive in 6 days." "Earth," Morgan murmured. She had been born in space, had spent her entire life moving between stars. She had never seen the homeworld except in recordings and simulations. "They'll want a hero's welcome," Commander Torres said. "Parades, ceremonies, the whole thing." "They deserve better than ceremonies," Morgan replied. "They deserve to know that their sacrifice, 3,000 years of isolation, of struggle, of refusing to give up, wasn't in vain. We're not primitives. We never were. We were just preparing." She turned to face her crew, these men and women who represented the best of what humanity had become. "Set course for Earth." It's time to go home. As the Resolute's engines thrummed to life and space warped around them, Morgan allowed herself to imagine what the next 3,000 years might bring. Humanity had knocked on the galaxy's door and been welcomed inside. Now came the real challenge, proving that chaos and creativity, properly directed, could match and maybe even exceed the achievements of perfect order. The stars blurred into lines of light as they jumped to FTL, and Morgan smiled. After 3,000 years of waiting, humanity's real journey was just beginning.